In episode 92, titled Data Handling and Evidence, the emphasis is on evidence handling as a discipline that builds trust while actively reducing harm. Evidence is how you show that a finding is real, repeatable, and worth fixing, but it is also where careless behavior can create new risk for the organization. Good evidence handling demonstrates professionalism because it shows that you can prove impact without exposing sensitive information or destabilizing systems. In many engagements, stakeholders judge the quality of the work as much by how evidence is handled as by what vulnerabilities are found. This episode frames evidence handling as a core skill, not an afterthought, because strong evidence practices protect the client, protect the tester, and strengthen the credibility of every finding. When evidence is handled well, remediation conversations become focused and constructive instead of defensive. Evidence can take many forms, and understanding what counts helps you choose the least risky option that still proves the point. Logs can show authentication events, access attempts, configuration changes, or system responses that confirm behavior without revealing content. Screenshots can capture visible proof of access, settings, or system state, provided they are framed carefully to avoid exposing unnecessary data. Configuration artifacts can demonstrate misconfigurations or excessive permissions in a way that is often more precise than narrative explanation alone. Observed behavior, such as a successful access attempt or a denied action at a boundary, can also be evidence when it is documented clearly with context. The key idea is that evidence is about demonstrating conditions and outcomes, not about collecting raw data for its own sake. When you understand the range of evidence types, you can choose the safest form that still supports the claim. The principle of minimum necessary data is central to evidence handling because it forces you to think critically about what you actually need to collect. Collecting extra sensitive information rarely strengthens a finding, but it almost always increases risk. Minimum necessary data means capturing only what is required to demonstrate access, impact, or control failure, and nothing beyond that. This principle applies to volume, scope, and sensitivity, because even a small amount of highly sensitive data can be more risky than a larger amount of benign metadata. It also applies to time, because retaining evidence longer than needed creates unnecessary exposure. A disciplined tester asks, "What is the smallest artifact that proves this?" and stops there. That mindset keeps evidence handling aligned with both ethical and operational expectations. Secure storage concepts are the next layer of discipline because evidence is only as safe as the place it lives. Encryption protects confidentiality if evidence is lost, misdirected, or accessed by someone without authorization. Access control ensures that only approved individuals can view or handle evidence, which reduces the chance of accidental disclosure or misuse. Limited sharing reinforces both of those controls by preventing evidence from spreading into uncontrolled environments such as personal devices or informal collaboration channels. Secure storage is not about complexity, it is about intentionality, knowing where evidence is stored, who can reach it, and under what conditions. When evidence storage is treated casually, it becomes a liability rather than an asset. When it is treated deliberately, it reinforces trust in the engagement and in the findings. Chain of custody is a concept borrowed from legal and investigative contexts, but it applies just as well to technical evidence. Conceptually, it means tracking who accessed evidence, when they accessed it, and what actions they took with it. This does not require courtroom-level formality in most testing engagements, but it does require enough tracking that you can explain how evidence was handled if questions arise later. Chain of custody matters because evidence can be challenged, misunderstood, or misused if its history is unclear. It also matters internally because teams may need to know who has seen sensitive material and whether copies exist elsewhere.
By maintaining a simple, clear record of evidence handling, you reduce ambiguity and protect everyone involved.
The goal is accountability, not bureaucracy.
Redaction and masking are practical techniques for protecting identities and sensitive content while preserving the meaning of the evidence.
Redaction removes or obscures specific details, such as names, identifiers, or values that are not necessary to understand the issue. Masking replaces sensitive values with placeholders or partial representations that show structure without revealing full content. Both techniques allow you to demonstrate access or misconfiguration without exposing personal data, secrets, or regulated information. The challenge is to redact thoughtfully, because over-redaction can make evidence meaningless, while under-redaction can leak sensitive details. A good rule is to preserve what proves the condition and remove what does not add explanatory value. When redaction and masking are done well, reviewers can understand the risk without seeing the underlying sensitive data. Labeling evidence is an often overlooked skill that has outsized impact on clarity and credibility. Every piece of evidence should clearly indicate time, source, context, and confidence so that it can be interpreted correctly later. Time tells the reviewer when the evidence was captured, which matters for correlating with logs, changes, and remediation efforts. Source identifies where the evidence came from, such as which system, account, or component was involved, without exposing unnecessary detail. Context explains what the evidence is meant to show and under what conditions it was observed, reducing guesswork and misinterpretation. Confidence indicates whether the evidence directly proves the claim or supports it indirectly, which helps readers weigh its significance. Clear labeling turns raw artifacts into understandable proof. Consider a scenario where you need to capture proof of access without exposing customer data, which is a common and sensitive situation. You may have validated that an account can read a customer database, but copying records would create unnecessary risk and possibly violate scope or policy. In this case, you can capture evidence that shows access exists without extracting the data itself, such as a screenshot of a query interface showing authorized access, a record count, or a schema view that confirms the nature of the data. You might also document the permissions that allow the access, showing configuration evidence rather than content evidence. This approach demonstrates the risk clearly while avoiding the handling of customer data altogether. The scenario illustrates that good evidence often focuses on capability rather than content. Pitfalls in evidence handling are often obvious in hindsight, but easy to fall into under time pressure. Copying entire databases is a classic mistake because it creates massive confidentiality risk while rarely adding clarity to the finding. Storing evidence in unsecured locations, such as personal cloud storage or shared drives without access control, can turn a test artifact into a data breach. Another pitfall is failing to track where evidence was shared, which can lead to uncontrolled distribution and long-term retention beyond what is necessary. It is also risky to collect evidence that is out of scope, even if it is technically accessible, because that undermines trust and can invalidate the engagement. Avoiding these pitfalls requires planning and discipline, not advanced tooling. Quick wins in evidence handling often come from simple consistency rather than complex controls. Standard naming conventions make it easier to find, reference, and correlate evidence later, especially when multiple findings are involved. Consistent notes about what was captured, why it was captured, and how it supports the finding reduce confusion during report writing and review. These practices save time because they prevent rework and reduce back-and-forth questions from stakeholders. They also improve quality because they make gaps and inconsistencies easier to spot early. When evidence is named and noted consistently, the entire engagement becomes easier to manage and explain. Small habits here pay dividends at reporting time. Communication boundaries are just as important as technical controls because evidence can be mishandled simply by sharing it with the wrong audience. Sensitive evidence should be shared only with approved recipients who have a legitimate need to know and the ability to handle it appropriately. This includes being mindful of meeting settings, screen sharing, and collaborative tools that may expose evidence to unintended viewers. Clear communication boundaries also mean being explicit about what can be forwarded, stored, or referenced in other documents. When boundaries are not set, evidence can escape into uncontrolled channels, creating risk long after the engagement ends. A professional approach treats evidence sharing as a controlled activity, not a convenience.
Evidence supports remediation by providing clear condition statements and reproduction steps that defenders can use to verify and fix the issue.
Good evidence shows what condition existed, how it was observed, and what control failed or was missing. It also supports reproduction by documenting the context and prerequisites so defenders can test whether a fix actually resolves the problem. Evidence should align with recommendations, reinforcing why the recommended control change matters and how it addresses the demonstrated risk. When evidence is clear and well-scoped, remediation becomes a technical task rather than a debate about whether the issue is real. This is where evidence handling directly influences security outcomes because it shapes how quickly and confidently teams can act.
A simple memory phrase can help anchor good habits. Minimal, secure, tracked, labeled, shared carefully. Minimal reminds you to collect only what is necessary to prove the finding, reducing risk and effort. Secure emphasizes protecting evidence through encryption, access control, and safe storage locations. Tracked reinforces the idea of chain of custody, so you always know who has handled the evidence and when. Labeled highlights the importance of clear context, timing, and source information to prevent misinterpretation. Shared carefully reminds you that evidence distribution is a risk surface of its own and must be controlled deliberately. As we conclude episode 92, strong evidence handling should feel like a natural extension of professional judgment rather than a burden. The habits of minimizing data, securing storage, tracking access, labeling clearly, and sharing cautiously build trust with stakeholders and reduce the chance that a test creates harm. A safe evidence capture plan you can rehearse is to first define the claim you need to support, then choose the least sensitive evidence type that proves it. Capture only the minimum artifact with clear context and labeling. Store it securely with restricted access, and document who has access and why. That plan keeps evidence handling aligned with ethical testing and effective reporting. When you apply these habits consistently, evidence becomes a tool for improvement rather than a source of risk, which is exactly the outcome Pen Test Plus Reasoning is designed to reinforce. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.